Picture this: a dusty sandal being pulled off someone's foot in front of 10 witnesses seals a marriage deal that changes the course of history. Today, we're diving into Ruth chapter 4 and its fascinating connections to ancient legal customs, social safety nets, and God's redemptive plan. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how gleaning laws protected the vulnerable, why sandal exchanges mattered more than signatures, and how Ruth's story parallels the wilderness training of an entire nation. So let's start with that sandal moment. What exactly was happening when that Kinsman redeemer pulled off his shoe?
According to the page content from Bible Hub, in ancient Israel, civil transactions lacked written contracts for common people, so public symbolic acts served to bind agreements. Ruth 4:7 explains that in former times in Israel, concerning redemption and exchange, to confirm a matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to his neighbor.
Wait, so no contracts? Just shoe removal?
Exactly. But it's deeper than that. The sandal represented the foot's right to tread and claim dominion. When someone yielded their sandal, they were literally surrendering their legal claim to walk that property. Boaz would now walk the field of Elimelech and the life of Ruth.
That's actually brilliant symbolism. And this all happened at the city gate?
Right. According to the page content, in ancient Israelite towns, the gate was far more than an entrance. It was where elders sat, disputes were heard, and transactions were ratified. It was basically a combination city council chamber and courtroom.
So this wasn't some private backroom deal, it was completely public and official.
Absolutely. And here's what's fascinating. The page content mentions that Nuzi tablets from the 15th century BC and Alalakh texts record similar exchange rights, where objects like shoes or staffs were passed to ratify land transfers. This wasn't unique to Israel.
Interesting. So there's archaeological evidence backing this up. But let's zoom out. How does Ruth even end up in this situation? What's the backstory with the gleaning laws?
Great question. The gleaning laws were essentially ancient Israel's social safety net. According to the page content, Leviticus 19:9-10 commanded landowners not to reap to the very edges of their fields or gather all the gleanings after harvest. They had to leave them for the poor and the foreigner.
So Ruth, as a foreign widow, would have qualified for this protection?
Exactly. The page content explains that these laws were designed to provide for the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner residing among the Israelites. Ruth hit 3 of those categories. She was poor, widowed, and foreign.
That's incredible foresight for an ancient legal system. But there's something even more interesting here. How does Ruth's journey connect to the idea of wilderness training?
That's a fascinating parallel. The page content mentions that the Israelite journey from Egypt to Canaan serves as an illustration of relationship with God. God had a 2-step plan: take them out of Egypt, then directly into the promised land.
And Ruth's journey mirrors that somehow?
Think about it. Ruth leaves Moab, her Egypt, goes through a period of testing and provision in the fields, and ultimately enters into God's covenant promises through marriage to Boaz. Both journeys involve leaving the familiar, trusting God's provision, and entering into blessing.
That's a really compelling connection. But wait, wasn't there a legal issue with Ruth being a Moabite? I thought there were restrictions on that.
You're thinking of Deuteronomy 23:3, which says, "No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord." But according to the page content from Got Questions, there are several factors that made Ruth's marriage acceptable.
Such as?
First, the law forbade naturalization but didn't explicitly mention marriage. Second, according to Jewish tradition, curses follow the father, not the mother. The Mishnah Yevamot 8:3 states that while male Moabite converts were prohibited, their female counterparts, even the convert herself, are permitted immediately.
So there was actually legal precedent for this?
Yes, and most importantly, Ruth was a genuine convert. Her famous words to Naomi, "Your people will be my people and your God my God," showed her devotion to the God of Israel, not just to Naomi.
That brings up another interesting parallel, the whole uncovering feet incident at the threshing floor. What was that about?
According to the page content, in ancient Near Eastern etiquette, uncovering a man's feet while he slept was a humble, non-verbal appeal for covering, symbolic of seeking protection and marriage. Ruth was essentially saying, "I claim covenant protection. Perform your duty of redemption."
So it wasn't improper, it was actually a formal legal request.
Exactly. By lying at his feet, not beside him, Ruth avoided impropriety but positioned herself for a formal request. The page content notes that Near Eastern marriage contracts from Nuzi and Alalakh mention nocturnal betrothal negotiations followed by public ratification.
It's like she was following established protocol. And Boaz's response shows he understood exactly what she was asking for.
Right. He immediately blessed Ruth as an excellent woman, according to Ruth 3:11. The page content emphasizes that approaching at night protected both parties from gossip while permitting a private legal proposal before witnesses could be gathered at the gate.
This is fascinating because it shows how much thought and cultural wisdom went into these interactions. But here's what I'm curious about. How does this connect to the broader theme of protection that we see throughout the story?
Great observation. Boaz's protection of Ruth goes beyond just following the gleaning laws. The page content mentions he was a man of great wealth and influence and recognized as a very generous and gracious man. He actively ensured her safety and provision.
And that protection theme connects to something else, the parallel with Joseph not shaming Mary. Both men chose protection over public disgrace.
That's a beautiful connection. Both Boaz and Joseph, when faced with potentially compromising situations involving women under their care, chose the path of honor and protection rather than public exposure or abandonment.
It shows this consistent character of godly men throughout Scripture. But let's talk about the bigger picture. What was really at stake in Ruth 4?
According to the page content, this wasn't just about a field or even a marriage. The genealogy in Ruth 4, 1-7-22 stretches from Perez through Boaz to David, hinting at a future king and, from a New Testament perspective, at the Messiah himself.
So this little story about two widows in Bethlehem was actually a turning point in the history of Israel?
Exactly. The page content notes that what seemed like a small local story about two widows in Bethlehem expands to become a turning point in the history of Israel and ultimately of the nations.
That's incredible. And there's something poetic about the unnamed kinsman redeemer, isn't there?
Oh, yes. The page content mentions that when Boaz greeted the nearer kinsman, he literally called him Mr. So-and-so in Hebrew. The writer never identified his name because he wasn't worthy of the honor. He declined to fulfill his obligations.
So the guy who refused to preserve his brother's name ended up losing his own name to history. That's some serious poetic justice.
The page content quotes Poole saying it was a just punishment upon him, that he who would not preserve his brother's name might lose his own and lie buried in the grave of perpetual oblivion.
Wow. Meanwhile, Ruth, a foreign widow, gets her name preserved forever as an ancestor of David and Jesus. The irony is striking.
It really demonstrates how God's redemptive plan often works through the unexpected and marginalized. The page content emphasizes that gleaning laws reflected God's concern for justice, compassion, and provision for the marginalized in society.
And that brings us back to those gleaning laws. They weren't just about charity, were they?
Not at all. According to the page content, they served multiple purposes: practical social welfare, reminding Israelites of their dependence on God's provision, and fostering community and compassion. They were a tangible expression of love and obedience to God's commands.
So they built empathy into the economic system itself. That's pretty revolutionary thinking for any era.
Exactly. The page content notes that Deuteronomy 24:19 reiterates the need to remember one's own experience of slavery and deliverance, fostering a sense of empathy that translates into action.
It's like the system was designed to prevent people from forgetting where they came from. And Ruth's story shows how that system could create opportunities for redemption and inclusion.
Right. The page content emphasizes that Ruth's act of gleaning leads her to Boaz, who embodies the kinsman redeemer, thus illustrating God's overarching narrative of redemption and inclusion.
So when we step back from all these details, the sandals, the gleaning, the legal procedures, what's the bigger message here?
The page content suggests that Ruth 4 shows us how God weaves legal procedures, economic decisions, and family life into his redemptive plan. It's about how ordinary customs and laws can become vehicles for extraordinary grace.
And it challenges our often privatized view of salvation, doesn't it? This was all happening in public, with witnesses following established community practices.
Absolutely. The page content asks, how does public communal redemption speak to our often privatized view of salvation? Ruth's story shows redemption happening through community structures and social responsibility.
It's beautiful how all these elements work together. The legal protections, the economic safety nets, the community witnesses, the family obligations. It's like a whole ecosystem of care.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the page content notes that this ecosystem ultimately safeguards the Davidic lineage, leading to Messiah. God's providence operates through ordinary legal customs.
So, the next time we see someone in need, or witness an act of protection or provision, we might be looking at more than just human kindness. We might be seeing God's redemptive plan in action.
Exactly. Ruth's story teaches us that redemption often comes through ordinary people following extraordinary principles of justice and compassion.
And just like that dusty sandal being removed at the city gate changed everything for Ruth and Naomi, our small acts of obedience and care might be part of something much bigger than we realize.
That's the beauty of Ruth's story. It shows us that God's biggest plans often unfold through the smallest, most ordinary moments of faithfulness.
Thanks for joining us on Co-Pilot Podcasts. The next time you hear about someone gleaning in fields or removing sandals in ancient legal ceremonies, you'll know you're not just learning history, you're discovering how God writes redemption into the fabric of everyday life.